Cool. So that was a nice use of micro moments. Hi, I'm Shamsi Iqbal, and I'm presenting work on editing using Microtasks, which was done in collaboration with my colleagues, Jaime, Teevan, Dan Liebling, and Ann Thompson. So I'm going to start off with some audience participation. So how many of you during this session have been using the time in between presentations to get a few things done on your laptop or on your mobile phone? Wow, everyone, good. How many of you, in general, when you're transitioning in and out of meetings, in and out of activities, in and out of the office, check email, check social media, do other kind of like quick tasks? Okay, it's almost the same group of people. How many of you would like to find an extra hour every day? I'm not saying for work. Yeah, now we're talking. And how many of you have written a research paper on your phone? No one. Oh, yeah. I see one person. A watch, maybe? No, we're not going to talk about the watch. So the fact of the matter is that user attention is fragmented. And the part of the fragmentation comes from the fact that we, human beings, are natural multitaskers. So we want to, and we tend to think that we're able to do many things near simultaneously. And in many cases, we're able to do so. But we also overestimate our ability to do multiple activities at the same time. Contrary to what we might believe about ourselves, we are not really very good at protecting ourselves from external or internal interruptions. And we are also not very good at directing our attention to the right task at the right moment. And this is why you see things like this happening. Again, this is not something that we're advocating. But if you think about it, there are many micro moments that exist during the day. When you're standing in front of an elevator, when you're waiting in line to get coffee or food, and my favorite, when you're waiting to get the projector set up. So typically the way that we use these micro moments are we put in tasks like checking email, browsing, communications, maybe to-do lists, but we do not think of complex tasks such as writing a paper or preparing my UIST presentation or, God forbid, coding during these micro moments, because complex tasks are not quite compatible with micro moments. But can they be? I gave it away a little. So this is where the notion of microtasks comes in. So microtask has its basis in psychology, and I like to use the definition that is provided by Knudsen and Enquist, where microtasks are nothing but perceptual units of behavior. So microtasks are, in other words, they're chunks of larger tasks where you put them together, they can achieve a larger goal. And microproductivity is the way that you can transform a larger task into these smaller subtasks. So if we decompose a larger task into its component subtasks, and then we can take those component subtasks and map them to the different micro moments so that we can get at least part of that larger task done in bursts of time. So the notion of microproductivity and microtasks in general is not new. There has been quite a large body of research that has been going on in the past few years. In 2015, Justin Cheng and colleagues looked at how performance on microtasks compares to performance on macrotasks, and he showed that microtasks are more resilient to interruptions, they produce less task error, people find them easier, as Jaime mentioned in her keynote yesterday. There were other work that has looked at how you can use microtasks for taxonomy creation or structuring the web, photo ranking, learning a new language, even creating an audiobook. In the domain of writing even, microtask has been explored, particularly in terms of how we can incorporate crowd workers. Tools like Soylent, Ensemble, CrowdForge have all looked at breaking down the process of writing into different stages and then engaging the crowd workers in those different stages to get things done. WhereWrite is another example of where you could actually write from a watch, where the management of the writing task throughout the crowd workers is done through a watch interface. From the perspective of individual microtasking, MicroWriter can bring together a group of collaborators who can all contribute to a larger writing task by following a structured workflow made out of microtasks. So what is missing? The notion of using these micro moments and having a good way of presenting these microtasks to an individual so that they can get their own writing done in short bursts, that's something that has been missing in the literature. It's interesting because compared to crowd workers, the users themselves have a lot of context. So when you have the microtasks, you don't necessarily need to embed a lot of context in those microtasks, because as the user or as the author yourself, you already have that context. And the other good thing is that this can be used in combination with the more focused writing, where you could microtask to defer some of the more mundane tasks for later and then keep on focusing on your main writing. So this is where Playwright comes in. We developed this Playwright system, which is basically a mobile microproductivity writing tool that works in combination with Word. It takes Microsoft Word documents and extracts microtasks out of them and presents them on your mobile device in this game-like interface. The tasks are mostly context-free and designed in such a way that they fit well into not only a limited form factor, but also the limited attention scenarios in which these mobile devices are typically used. So this is how a user experience would look like. So the user works on their Word document, and then the tool in the background would extract the microtasks out of that Word document. These are then presented on the mobile device, which the user can interact with during their micro moments in a game-like fashion. And then later, when they return to their Word document, the changes are reflected back. So the type of tasks that are currently supported, and we are just starting to scratch the surface here. So we support simple tasks like fixing spellings, identifying wordy sentences. Once you identify a wordy sentence, you can go ahead and delete some of the words so that they become shorter. Accept or reject changes, something that we typically don't like to do, or we just do an overall just accept or reject. Classify comments, reply to comments. You can even go into the text and start editing a little bit. We purposefully wanted to keep the editing piece limited because of the form factor and the difficulties in typing. We could add comments and mark to-dos. I would just like to point out the interface here. So if you look at the second screen, this is basically what a microtask or a micro-writing task looks like. The second one is a accept or reject change. So it just extracts the text from the Word document around the edit that has been made, and you can select one of the buttons down to accept or reject that change. And the third one is a fixed spelling task, and it just, again, it picks out the sentence that contains the spelling that is wrong and provides a set of alternatives that you could pick from. Again, something that you could do in a few seconds and then move on to the next task. So this is what is happening under the hood. So in the Word interface, there is a Go Mobile button. So before you are about to leave your Word document, you would hit the Go Mobile button. And then there is a Word plugin that interrogates the API to get the microtasks. The microtasks are uploaded to a cloud server, and this is managed through a server-side workflow engine. Each task has associated with it the original text, the text surrounding it for context, where the text exists in the document, and the status of that text, whether it has changed in the document after it was uploaded to the cloud or it has been changed in the mobile interface after it had been uploaded, so that you can make sure that you're being consistent. The server, once the microtasks are ready, it pushes the microtask to the mobile app, and they're available for the user to interact with. The user, when they have micro moments, they would interact with the microtasks. And then the user actions or the user changes or edits are being periodically pushed back to the server. When the user returns to the Word document, there is another little button that says Get Changes, and that integrates the changes back into the document. So that's pretty much it. So it's a super simple system. The implementation was complex, but at least the experience was very clean. So we had many thoughts about how we want to evaluate the system, and then we decided that, okay, we wanted to get an initial sense of what the experience of microtasking or writing via microtasks was. And we wanted to do this in a divided attention scenario because that's where we envision this being most useful. So we did a lab study with 16 people. It was a within subject study, and as a point of comparison, we used mobile Word. We pre-selected a couple of documents for each interface, and these were something that we got from Wikipedia, a document on rhetorics and the other one on public speaking. And as the primary task, users had to watch two annoying orange videos. And Jaime mentioned this again in her keynote, so if you didn't watch them, you should. They're entertaining. So the goal was that we wanted to simulate a situation where people are watching something and in between they might be able to fit in a few editing tasks. And to help with that, we also inserted commercials. And our hypothesis was that people would be watching the videos, and at the commercials they would go in and they would edit and they would come back and watch the video. And our goal was to see, well, if we use Playwright in this kind of scenario, how does it compare to using something like mobile Word? We had inserted about 200 possible editing tasks in each of the documents, and so people had enough tasks, and each of the videos were about 15 minutes long. So it turned out that people did not necessarily edit the way that we had imagined them to. They actually, they were doing it near simultaneously. They were watching the video, but the editing became the primary task. We found that overall impressions about Playwright was pretty positive, at least compared to mobile Word. The number of edits that people were able to complete using Playwright were 55 compared to the 28 that people were able to do in mobile Word. People found it easier to edit the documents or the microtasks in Playwright compared to mobile Word. They felt less stressed while editing compared to mobile Word. Perceived productivity, in both cases, people didn't feel that productive, but they felt more productive compared to mobile Word using Playwright. And they also felt that Playwright provided better task switching support because these tasks are so short. Even if you are switching back and forth, it's easy to resume compared to being engaged in mobile Word. So, of course, there were limitations. Users were unfamiliar with their documents because it wasn't their own documents. They had a chance to look it over, and they were able to do the editing task because these were, again, very simple editing tasks. But we believe that if it was their own documents, we would see even more engagement with Playwright. We also did the lab study for a variety of reasons, partly because we wanted to get an initial impression of what people thought about Playwright, and we could ask pointed questions. But a more in-depth study would be needed to do in situ, and where people would be using Playwright in the field during the true micro moments when they're attending meetings or when they're switching between tasks and whatnot. And the other thing that we also found is that even though we carefully thought out the tasks that we wanted to put in Playwright, not all of them were suitable in all contexts. So sometimes people felt that even something like deciding whether this was a wordy sentence that required a bit more context, or sometimes other type of deletions, they were a bit worried about replying to comments because they didn't have enough context, and so there was this need for context in certain cases that they felt that Playwright didn't offer at that point. So, in terms of future work, Playwright, now that we have a system like Playwright, it offers us opportunities to explore many other research questions. And the first and foremost one is that how can we incorporate editing from other people's? Because now that we have a set of microtasks, we could give these microtasks to other collaborators, crowd workers, and even to ourselves at different stages of during our day. And also, once you have many microtasks and you have the corresponding responses, you can start automating some of these. So you can imagine that when you take a larger task, you break it down into subtasks. Some tasks are for yourself, you're the expert, you can do those. Other tasks anyone in the world could do. So for example, fixing spelling. Certain tasks your collaborators are probably experts and they can do. And so by breaking it down, you're actually reducing the task load on a person. But again, there's also the cost of combining them back up, so you have to take that into account. And in general, we are also interested in how this micro-writing in general affects the overall quality of writing. Once you combine back the content that you create using micro-writing, how does that compare with sitting down and setting aside time to get focused writing? And we haven't answered that question yet, but we're still exploring that. So with that, I would like to end and open up the floor for questions.
Okay, we have a question in the back, Wendy. Yes. Hi, Wendy Mackay from INRIA. Very interesting, but a little disturbing. So,
I knew I was going to get that.
Yes. So it seems to me that what you're doing, I'll stand back here, is you're talking about copy editing. You're not talking about writing. And the problem you have with writing is that you do need to step back and get a higher level thing. And even at the level of rewriting a paragraph, if you've broken it up into small little pieces, you've lost the context and the thread. So what you're talking about, it sounds to me, as a sort of self-crowd-shared copy editing task for sort of polishing up your students' work or your colleagues' work or something like that. But I'm not sure how this translates into what I would call writing, which is a creative task, not a sort of mechanical piece-by-piece thing. So what do you think?
So for the content creation, so we published a paper at CHI a couple of years ago. So that was called MicroWriter, which is the companion to this, and that's where we actually created content using microtasks. This one is more about using the micro moments, to be honest. And you're right. This is about copy editing most of the tasks that we present here. And we're not necessarily suggesting that this replaces your focused editing tasks by any way. The way that I see this is that even when you're focused writing and there are these mundane tasks, I have to insert a citation, or I need to quickly go and find this fact, and that takes away focus from yourself. And if you could defer these as microtasks for later, and then you could go and do them in your micro moments. You don't need context, but at the same time, you're able to focus on what you're doing and not get distracted there also. But yes, I mean, there are many avenues to explore here, and it is true that this part is more about the copy editing piece.
Okay. I'll defer to the other
questions. We'll go to the other mic.
I'm Lisa from ETH Zurich. Thank you very much for this insight. So I'm new to microtasks and microwriting, and I have a very basic question. Mm-hmm. Is there any definition of a microtask? Is there can you say, okay, if it takes only so many seconds, it is a microtask, but as soon as it takes more than a minute, it's not a microtask anymore, or is there...
I think there are many definitions in psychology, and I would say if it's something that, there's no definition in terms of how much time, but I would say that something that's quick and requires very little context to do, that should be a microtask. But yes, I think that just finding a crisp definition that it has these kinds of features, I think that's slightly difficult. But it's basically, it's something that's, if you break down a task, it's one of those basic units. So you can do them independently, and they combine with some other tasks to work up to a larger task.
And do you think it would help to find a threshold, time-wise, to define a microtask, or is that not needed?
I think it should. So I think it's a good point, and I don't quite know what the threshold should be, but it's something, again, I would say maybe a minute or so, and I'm just guessing on this. But there are literature in psychology that goes deeper into this, and it depends also on the individual user.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to go to the back again.
Aaron from Google. Love the talk. Thanks for sharing with us. I'm curious about the complement to writing, which is reading, and tasks that might be a little bit more qualitative in evaluating them. Is reading something that has microtasks associated with it? And has your research turned up anything about qualitative tasks?
Good point. We haven't looked at reading, but I could imagine that it kind of you could break down a reading into its component subtasks. Different people read in different ways. Some people skim and then go into depth. And there are other ways of reading, I believe. And so you could decompose that into its component subtasks. In terms of qualitative, could you clarify that a little bit?
So success with reading is not a binary. Mm-hmm. It's more do you feel like you understood it? Are you able to relay the information? And so things that are less of a yes/no, is it complete or is it not complete? I'm curious if you looked into any tasks that have those fuzzier metrics.
We haven't, and that's a great idea. Cool. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to take one last question while the next speaker can set up.
Hi, Jonathan from Stanford. I was wondering if you could say a little bit more about where these microtasks come from. And I could imagine if you have to define the microtask, then that could take longer than actually just doing it
So in this case, we came up with the microtask. We came up with the list ourselves, but we also have been looking at how you could create these different microtasks. And we have a paper coming up in CSCW where we look at how you could combine different vocabulary items. So you have these very basic unit actions, and you could combine them together quickly to create your own set of microtasks or own workflow. But in this case, we came up with the ones that we felt were most common to copy editing.
So do you have a taxonomy?
Okay.
Yeah, sorry.
I'm sorry, we're going to stop it here.
So follow our CSCW paper. I can find it too.